make one thing really clear before I start on my speech, right? We're not just talking about countries with gross human rights violations, right? We're not just talking about things like civil conflicts, we're also talking about things like environmental refugees, or people who necessarily are having like problems within their homeland, right? So we think that their entire substantive, especially in the dying moments of the speech, about these people who are aiding and abetting like dictators or something like that, and gross human rights abusers, doesn't exactly stand in every situation, right? So we want to challenge their side to deal with the full extent of the refugees they were talking about here. I'm going to bring to you three main points of contention, or rather three main questions, before I move on to my substantive, right? And this is going to deal with all the material coming out from first opposition. First idea is, why is there even this refugee problem in the very first place? What is the point of this debate? Second idea is, what does their policy do? And thirdly, about which side best benefits the people, best benefits the refugees' conditions. First idea about why is there even this problem in the very first place. This is where Soumya came up to you right from first proposition speaker. Something that they've never rebutted, right? About how countries don't have an incentive to take in refugees. Simply because, refugees cost money. Simply because there's a lot of political backlash towards countries that want to take in refugees, right? Because the people don't like it. So they never dealt with that idea. And the only thing they said about it was that countries have, no thank you, a legal obligation that's apparently mandated by the international humanitarian law. Okay, for the first fact, ladies and gentlemen, right, we say that number one, this is not an obligation. This is something that is like morally praiseworthy, something that we encourage, but we don't force countries to do. Because we don't think that necessarily this law forces every single country to take away refugees that are coming to their door. Otherwise, we won't have cases, for instance, like in Australia, where they're turning away the Rohingyas, right? We don't have instances, for example, like Jordan turning away the Palestinian refugees a long time ago, simply because these Palestinian refugees gave them political problems previously, right? So we don't think that necessarily this is a legal obligation. So we think that on their side, they still have this problem, right? But secondly, we also think, no thank you, that even if there's a legal obligation, this legal obligation doesn't translate to actual action being put in place in the status quo. That's why we still have refugees that are still out there, right? Because even if there's a law there, there's nothing to do to enforce it. We don't see countries that are being charged in the ICJ for not taking in refugees. And thirdly, we also think that there's no way to charge these countries because, no thank you, we think that necessarily this isn't a crime that is necessary under their jurisdiction, right? Because we think that countries don't have their right, don't have an obligation to cater towards the people from like the international community. Their first and foremost priority is always their own people, and you can't fault countries for saying that. So necessarily we think that this legal obligation that they're talking about is completely rubbish, right? But more than that, they keep talking about how they're going to mandate countries in their policy. And this moves on to the second idea about what their policy does, right? No, thank you. About they're going to mandate countries that can do so to do as much as they can. Firstly, what does this mean by do as much as you can? Right? Because we think it's very difficult to quantify how much help a country can give to refugees or how much help it cannot. So we think that on their side of the house, the only thing that's going to happen is that countries are going to keep finding excuses or keep finding other things to occupy their money and say, oh, we have to develop our country, oh, we have to take care of our people. And therefore, you can never charge them for not helping refugees because they're never going to be able to have their resources to help refugees, right? Countries can only help refugees as much as they want to and as much as they are willing to make budgetary concessions towards it. But secondly, we also think that necessarily on their side of the house, they don't deal with the entire category of countries who necessarily have a lot of debts and therefore cannot help, right? Because on our side, we necessarily give those countries the means to help these refugees by lowering their debts, by lowering their principal sums, which gives them more resources to help these people. Hold on a moment, madam. And therefore, this analysis that Soumya gave to you, they never dealt with on their side of the house, right? Dealing with these countries that precisely cannot help refugees ordinarily, but empowering them to do so. Yes?
NPOs are the ones who funnel money into refugee programs. How is the